My parents were pretty busy running a business. They didn't really have a lot of time to watch out for me.
Hey guys, Jenica here from Multispective, and I'm here to share with you a new episode where I interview RC. He talks about being raised in a very poor environment in a Hispanic neighborhood that was actually pretty dangerous for him and his siblings. His parents were busy trying to make ends meet, and he, as a result, surrounded himself with a lot of bad, influential people that were in and out of prison for a variety of different crimes.
My first kite was bought for me by a convicted kidnapper.
He decided for himself that he was going to make better choices. So he talks about the ways that he turned his life around.
Picking up beer cans and beer bottles, recycled them, and in 3 years we made $3,000. And
chose healthier relationships, chose a life of career and good health and good wealth, and has built quite an empire for himself. So listen in, stay tuned. I hope you enjoy the episode and find some inspiration from it. RC, welcome to Multispective. I am so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So, you have a pretty interesting story. Why don't we begin with you telling us a little bit about where you were born and raised?
I was born in Southern California. My father was a plasterer and he was working on Disneyland. And as that job ended, he went to get some side work and ended up leasing a vacant restaurant. And we ran a restaurant for 10 years in a very interesting Hispanic neighborhood. My father spoke Spanish, and everyone assumed that he and I are Hispanic. Everywhere I go, people still speak to me in Spanish first.
Yeah.
And so we lived there 10 years, and it was a very rough and tough kind of a place. I saw everything one can see by the time I was 12 years old. Stabbings, shootings,
Yeah.
women being beaten up, men beating each other up. It was a very interesting place. So I learned a lot of valuable lessons.
So what was this neighborhood sort of like? Can you tell me a little bit more about the neighborhood?
Lower economic Hispanic neighborhood. We were on the edge of an area that was still agricultural. We had Japanese farmers that owned the land and would come into our restaurant and buy a bottle of sake and sit in the corner and get drunk and tell funny Japanese stories, I suppose. So we had a mix of all kinds of people. It was wonderful in that regard.
That's so interesting. You mentioned that like there was a lot of violence and stuff happening around the area. So how did your parents generally try to like keep you safe from it and protect you from all of it?
My parents were pretty busy running a business. They didn't really have a lot of time to watch out for me. But being a child, everyone kind of took me under their arm. My first kite was bought for me by a convicted kidnapper. We had a friend who was a cat burglar. If we ever locked the keys in the car, he'd come and pick the lock to our car. So all of my friends were different and interesting and had skills that were very valuable.
Wow. Oh, that's crazy. And I can imagine like, in a way it's can be quite intimidating and scary, but if you feel like you're kind of protected by these convicted criminals, you feel a sense of like safety. They have this sort of tendency to be very protective of their inner circle, their friends, their community. Yet at the same time, did you notice certain skills that you don't really see otherwise that they had? Like you talked about the picking the locks.
Well, a couple of the places had little markets inside their homes. One was run by a Japanese family, and one was run by a Mexican family. I was so young. I was about 6 years old when we moved there. So that was the first neighborhood I ever could remember. So I had no idea that there was another way to live. So all those things happening around me were very normal. I had nothing to compare it to.
Right. And the restaurant that you own, your family owned, what kind of a restaurant was it?
It was a Mexican restaurant. And
Right.
so we had a bar and a large dance hall. We had large bands. We would go to Tijuana in Mexico and get mariachi bands. We had
Wow.
Ike and Tina Turner perform there. We had large Mexican barbecues where you dig a hole in the ground and cook a steer in the ground. And so it was mostly catering to Hispanic people. There were gangs in the area and so forth.
Wow. Did you ever feel sort of tempted to join? Did anyone try to recruit you, or did you ever like learn skills from it and ever consider kind of entering that kind of community as well?
No, because for some reason I saw those people that I knew go away for long stretches of time back to jail. And so I understood that they were locked up, and I didn't want to be locked up. And I was so young, and I was kept so busy working that I didn't have time to get into trouble. That was the benefit of being in a family business like that. I was under the surveillance of my parents in a work routine, but not in a parental supervision environment.
Right. What about your mom? Were you close to your mom at the time?
I don't think so much. My father was an alcoholic, and she was dealing with that in her marriage for they never divorced. They should have. And so she was preoccupied with watching out for him and trying to keep him on his feet so he could keep the money coming in. She learned to cook from a woman who we hired in the kitchen. My mom was a great cook of Mexican food. My oldest brother worked in the kitchen. My brother, the next brother older than I, worked there. And we all, it was a family business. We all were there working all the time. When I was in third grade, I would walk from school to that restaurant a mile or two away and go to work sweeping floors and washing dishes and sweeping the parking lot and loading beer. Or we would sell 50 cases of beer on a Saturday night when we had a big dance. So there was always plenty of things to do.
Wow. And you were so young at this point. Like, when you look back on it, do you kind of wish that you had more time, freedom to be a child? Or are you kind of glad that you had the childhood that you had?
Well, I didn't really have a childhood, and that's why I'm probably childlike now. I have a lot of fun in my life. I relate well to children, and
Yeah.
I don't mind getting on the floor and playing with them. I would go out occasionally outside and I would pick up cigarette butts off the parking lot. And I started smoking when I was quite young. I had a corncob pipe that my brother gave me, and I quit smoking when I was 12.
You
So most kids
quit
are starting.
smoking at 12.
Yes, yes. And my parents saw me smoke. They didn't intervene because they knew that trying to stop someone from doing something like that is a fruitless effort. You have to let them work their way through it and quit on their own accord. I suppose my mother, dealing with my father's alcoholism, trained her in that regard. So she kind of left me to my own devices. Uh, but yeah, I love that environment. I look back on it with great affection. I learned to appreciate people of all sorts, and I I wouldn't change a thing if I could.
I mean, there's so many like alarm bells. I'd imagine someone from the UNICEF listening to this going ding, 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 ding. Like it's just, this should be on every single, child protection welfare sort of report,
Absolutely.
right?
And this is the interesting thing, that my brother and I both say that we should either be dead or in prison. But we saw these things, we were exposed to these things, and they gave us lessons to learn from. We didn't emulate that behavior, we learned what not to do, where others might emulate that behavior. That may be the luck of the draw. I can't explain that.
Yeah.
But that's how we turned out. My brother is self-employed, very, very successful. I took over my father's business when he retired, and I was very successful. And my sister worked in a business where she's a very high-ranking female in her profession. She's retired now. But so we all did amazingly well considering where we came from. And my
Yeah.
parents never had any money to speak of. And my brother and I and my sister all three of us are wildly more successful than we ever dreamed of being. It's remarkable.
Yeah. Do you think that through adversity comes like this blossom of a person? Do you believe in that sort of concept?
Absolutely. I had nothing to lose. We only had one way to move, and that was up. We slept in our restaurant. My mother gave me baths in the kitchen sink. I can remember my mother's giving me a bath now and then in the kitchen sink of our restaurant. It was an enormous sink, and I didn't get a bath every day. I can remember seeing those look like varicose veins on my arms from little boy sweat and dirt mixing into mud. And every now and then my mother would catch me and scrub me down. I was hyperactive, and so she had her hands full with my father and the business and myself. And then she had a little girl at 37. Uh, and in 1968, my sister was born, 58, pardon me, and my mother was 37. And you didn't see many women around at 37 having children. So that again kept my mother very occupied.
Can you tell me about like your feelings towards your parents now, looking back on things. I mean, I know you mentioned you were not very close to them at the time, but looking back on it, like, because I do sense there's quite a lot of empathy that you feel towards your mom, the way you've kind of reiterated the fact that she was very, hands full with her husband, her marriage, trying to like, keep the business running. Do you feel a certain sense of like compassion towards your mom, or do you still feel?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm always amazed at women who complain of not being in a place of power, because I grew up in a place where the woman was the head of the household basically, and at that time maybe that wasn't prevalent, but it was prevalent in my life. So I at that time understood that women were smart, powerful, and could take you wherever you wanted to go. So for me as an adult to hear adult women complain of not being able to get past the glass ceiling now, I have to kind of look at in unbelief, because my mother was so able to do whatever she wanted to do within the confines of her life at that time. She was obviously frustrated for many reasons, but she did not let anything hold her back. Perhaps like me, she was forced to be a stronger person perhaps than she wanted to be, to take the place of my father's weaknesses.
Right. Yeah.
He would leave and disappear for days on end, and we would not know when he was coming back. I sat in a divorce attorney's office more than once with my mother planning on divorcing my father. If my mother would have divorced my father, he would have been dead in a year, I'm sure. And he wasn't always he wasn't always a drunk, or wasn't always drunk. He was a periodic alcoholic. He could go for a couple of years or more and be sober, but he was a genius. He was wonderful. He could sing, he could play the piano, the violin, and the guitar, all self-taught. He could dance. He did that for a living at times, and before he was married. He drove a taxi cab in Salt Lake as a young guy. He got drafted in the Army in World War II. He had 7 brothers and 7 sisters. So they had some things to deal with when he was growing up.
Right.
He said they used to look for the lumps in the oatmeal.
I mean, it's a tough time. And I think like, I guess trauma does sort of pass down, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you carry all of that the baggage with you. Can you tell me some of the struggles that you experienced as you started aging into teenage and adulthood? What were some of the traumas that you carried forward with you, or the pain that you carried forward from your childhood?
Well, I think all of us have that childhood trauma. No parent is perfect. And I think, if anything, I was more protected against that because of the environment that I grew up in, where someone who lived in a quasi, in quotes, normal family wouldn't have the tools to deal with that. I grew up in a family where I knew that I was on my own from the get-go and developed skills to deal with it. I have to tell you, yesterday I volunteer with my wife one day a week in a hospital, and there was a coyote walking down through the parking lot. And the woman I work for said, "Can you go down and check on that coyote down in the parking lot? Are you afraid of a coyote?" I said, "No." So I walked down to chase a coyote away. Maybe a normal person would have said, "No, thank you. Yes, I am
Yeah,
afraid of coyotes."
exactly.
But that was my response. I'm not afraid of anything, because at my age and with the things that have happened to me in my life, uh, fear doesn't accomplish anything. You either accomplish the task at hand, or you develop a better plan, or you sit and fret about it. If you sit and fret about it, you're going to sit and fret about it. You're not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah, true. So how did you sort of decide or figure out how to establish sort of healthy relationships? Seeing your mom and dad, they were not really the most ideal sort of role model of a relationship or of a marriage that you were watching growing up. So how did you sort of manage to turn that around in your own life and, seek out a healthy, happy, beautiful relationship that you have, marriage that you have?
Well, I have been married twice. I was married the first time for 7 years, and I had a son with my ex-wife. She came from a family very much like mine, where the parents didn't get along well. Her father was an alcoholic. So we both brought similar baggage to that relationship. And so I think both of us were kind of wounded souls. And that relationship ended after nearly 7 years on her part. She decided that there were other people in the world she'd like to get to know better rather than her husband. And so I terminated that relationship. And at the time, I had a 2-year-old son. And I think part of her issue was postpartum depression. Perhaps I'm going to give her that grace. And I met a woman during the time I left my wife who I've been now married to for 40 years. And I picked her because she was wonderful with my son, because she's very smart. She's a Navy veteran. She was one of the first 5 female navigators in the U.S. Navy. She passed the test to go into the Naval Academy, but women weren't allowed to go in at the time. And she's just a very wonderful person. And I shopped better the second time around because I was more mature. But
Yeah.
everyone's entitled to one mistake, I suppose,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
I think one is plenty. I don't want to have two.
I'm also hearing a running theme here, like that you found yourself someone maybe without realizing another powerful woman. And it was like almost like a
Oh,
familiarity, right? A comfort of like,
oh,
you've seen this before, you know this, you understand
I'm
this. Yeah.
I'm attracted to women like that. My first wife was like that, but she wasn't quite as smart as she was powerful. And my current wife is very smart and powerful, and I don't have any notions about having any control over someone. And you can't make your partner happy. That's on them. You have to just be the best person you can be. Uh, we've sadly, my only child passed away last April at the age of 42, and we've been dealing with this. And so this also puts things into perspective. Uh, I have no grandchildren. I have no children now. My son was born with some birth defects that you wouldn't notice them if you saw them, but they had him a little bit behind the schedule as far as his mental capacities at first. He was quite normal down the road. He was a hard worker and a very good outgoing person. He was a copy of me and his mother, obviously. He was very personable. And sadly, he had a stroke at 42 and died. And we've had to deal with this. And once and I never had any idea that my son would marry or have children because of his um, disabilities. Again, they weren't visible, but I think he even understood that his mental capacity, or perhaps he didn't, but his mental capacity by its nature made him not mature enough to see himself being married, perhaps. He had girlfriends and he loved women, and he had lots of a big circle of friends. He was very artistic, and he had a great life. But we didn't think we would ever have grandchildren. And now that he's gone, of course, we know that we're not going to. We have other children and young people in our lives to take those places. But once you lose a marriage and then you lose a child, um, it puts a new spin on your life. So to walk out and chase a coyote down the street isn't that big a deal, I guess would be a way to look at it.
Yeah. How did you, or are you dealing with the loss of a child, knowing that you've outlived your own kin?
It's impossible to get over, and some days are better than others. It's been a year and a few months, and we just have to go on. We have no choice. My wife and I were very successful. I'm very financially comfortable, and we worked very hard because we knew my son would need some type of protection or umbrella as the time passed and we were gone. And so we had ample resources we bought him a condominium. We had several pieces of property, all paid for, and we had a house for him to move into if he wanted to. And when we were gone, he would have these resources to have income coming in. So we worked really hard to create that wealth. And we also donate to a lot of different charities. But we did a lot of this to protect my son so that he would have a good life when we were gone. And sadly, he's gone, and we're left with this wealth that we created. And so we have always given back to different philanthropic organizations. It doesn't imply that I'm so mega wealthy that I'm willing to spend some money in a different area. I don't drink, I don't smoke, so I have that extra income to toss to deserving people. Yeah, we're very blessed. We are very blessed.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like, it really puts things into perspective as well, because when you are like in the midst of that rat race, you're young, you're in your 30s, 40s, you're working extremely hard, you're trying to build yourself a wealth for a future that you don't know about. And
That's
when that
right.
future kind of comes into fruition, you realize at that point, that actually all of this money and all of this time that you spent trying to save and earn all this money, sometimes, it's you just don't know where your life will take you.
I worked in people's homes my whole working career,
Mhm.
and my wife's family live in London. Her father was born in London, so we go to London quite often. We traveled every year. I've been to 90 countries, including North Korea, India 3 times,
Wow.
China a couple of times, all around the world. And I'm leaving for Rwanda in August. Then we're going to Iran next year if it's still there. We'd love to go to Iran. It's a wonderful place,
Wow.
wonderful people.
Mm.
We've been to a lot of places all through Eastern Europe, been to Africa a couple of times. So we every year we took time because you don't know what the future holds for you. I don't
Mm.
want to be wanting to travel and being in a wheelchair.
Mm. That's
So we've
true.
traveled our whole 40 years together. We've traveled, and I've seen some just interesting, crazy things. We've been in Nepal. We were in Nepal the week before the king was killed, trekking in the mountains many, many years ago. Nepal is a wonderful place to go to, and it's life is too short. You have to go out and see the world and learn about other people. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been to India 3 times.
Mm.
The books I write fiction. Those books take place in different countries, and those people that I've met are floating around in my head, and I create these characters in my head, composites of people that I grew up with on different adventures. It's a process that's hard to explain. My wife lived in Italy for a year, and we've been to Italy 2 or 3 times. And so one of my books that I wrote takes place in Italy. And I was hyperactive as a child, and I'm still hyperactive.
Wow, I mean that's amazing. This is what I was saying earlier as well. It's just like you've turned such a difficult story into something so amazing. Can you tell me what is the key ingredient? What was that one thing what was that spark, or what is that little bit of knowledge or wisdom that you can impart to listeners on like how can they turn adversity? How can they turn it into a beautiful story?
Everyone has a story. And I was so fortunate to work in people's homes. I worked in over 200,000 homes, and I got to talk to people while I worked and ask them about their story. And here I am telling you about my story, but I'm sure that you have an interesting story also that people would benefit from being aware of.
Mm.
And so that's what I think. You have to keep your interest in people around you and keep an open mind about people and what they have to tell you. Everybody has something of value to tell you.
Mm.
And I think if you can remember that and know you don't have all the answers, and be open to listening to other people's points of view, especially if they lived in countries other than the United States, because we live in Disneyland.
Beautiful.
So we had those experiences, and that's a completely different environment than the United States.
Mm.
And it's important that I went there to see that, to know that people live in a different manner, and it's not wrong, it's different.
Yeah.
This is the thing. And at the end of the day, how do you measure your wealth or your success? It's whatever you carry in your heart and between your ears.
Mm.
That's what's valuable,
Yeah.
and that can't be taken away from you.
I agree. Since I started this podcast, I started listening to people's stories and stuff. And it is really inspiring when you listen. I take some of these stories and I reflect on my own life, and I realize that like it humbles me. Like I need to step away from my own situation for a minute and realize that there is so much out there. And then you listen to how they kind of turn their lives around, grieving the loss of a loved one, or going from addiction to, freedom from it. They've turned these stories into success, everyday heroes, right? And I think I really draw a lot of inspiration from that.
I think that shows the value of that experience of opening yourself up to other people. That's proof of the value of that experience.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the stories that really, really changed you that you heard throughout your travels from different people.
Well, I went to North Korea with my wife. Of course, you're not allowed to talk to anyone in North Korea, and I don't speak Korean. But we read some books before we went. The Aquariums of Pyongyang is a very interesting book.
Yeah.
Uh, and I do most of my research when I come back from my trips. I have a travel blog on my website at cowboyproductions52.com
Yeah.
where I tell my travel stories, and I have some photographs up there. And the first chapters of my novels are there as well. And so a lot of these stories that I write, I think, come from my travels and from my childhood. I have these characters frozen in my mind that were bigger than life because of their behavior was so foreign to normative behavior. At the time, I didn't know that because I had nothing to measure it against.
Right.
But they made a big impression on me. And later on, as an adult, and you are functioning in the world that I know now, which is unbelievably safe and uninteresting for
Yeah.
the most part, uh, I now understand and appreciate what I went through as a child. I had a shoe shine box and I shined shoes. I shot pool every day from the time I was 7 years old until I was 14. If I wasn't waiting on tables, I was shooting pool, and or loading beer boxes. I had a fellow refuse to pay his check once when I was about 11 years old, 10 years old, waiting a table at 2 o'clock in the morning after a dance. And I went to collect a check from him, and he refused. He tore it up and refused to pay, and I went after him. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm 10 years old. I'm sleepy. I've worked all day, and I'm waiting to get this all cleaned up and go to bed. And I called him everything but a human being. And when my brother came out, my older brother came out, he looked like the guy who played Superman in the original TV series, 6'2" and 250 pounds.
Right.
He came out and extracted the money from this gentleman and escorted him out of the place. A woman sitting at the table next to me said, "Where did you learn to cuss like that?" And I said, "Well, I have two older brothers and I live in this bar." And she gave me a $2 tip. And that was in 1962 when $2 was
A
real
lot of
money.
money. Yeah.
That was a lot of money in
Yeah.
1962. So I have a lot of stories like that I've written, and they're on my website. And so we had people break into our home and try to kill my father in our property. They sabotaged our cars so we couldn't leave. They fed our watchdogs. And I grew up biting my fingernails. In my childhood, I always had my nails bit down as far as you could bite them down.
Yeah.
I probably quit biting my nails when I was about 25.
Yeah.
But yeah, saw a lot of interesting things. Saw chased people down the street with my father holding a gun, who had tried to sabotage our truck. Chased them down the street and hoping to be able to catch them and shoot them
My
when
gosh.
I'm 10 or 11.
Yeah.
So going out in the parking lot to chase a coyote away isn't that big a deal
Yeah.
when you're used to chasing people down the road who may be armed. Yeah, you know, those were the good old days.
Do you sometimes seek that kind of thrill again? With your travels, maybe do you feel like you're trying to look for that kind of thrill factor again?
It's interesting. I don't think so, other than the fact that we go to places that no one else goes to. People say, Ray, you go to places that no one really thinks to go.
Yeah.
We've been to the five stands. We've been to Mongolia. We've been all through Eastern Europe. We've been to North Korea. We've been through I speak Spanish, and so we've been through South America and Cuba and Spain. Every place you go to, things can go haywire.
Right. Yeah.
Where you live, where I live. Every day something goes off the
Yeah.
rails, and we have no control over that. So if you're going to sit back and think that you're going to live a life of complete safety, you're mistaken. An airplane can fall through the roof of your house right now.
That's true.
Go out and see something and experience life. And at my age, I've lost everything important to me. I've made as much money as I'll ever need. My wife will live to be 110. I'll be long gone. I have no reason not to go out into the world and face whatever comes my way. My best years are behind me, sadly. So being in that mindset, it makes you impervious to fear.
Yeah.
But maybe I always was impervious to fear. Maybe that's who I was. Maybe it had nothing to do with where I was born or raised or who my friends were. We'll never know.
Yeah.
That's another interesting topic.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to ask. Like, do you have like a group of friends that also kind of are risk takers like you? I mean, you earlier mentioned that you're going to Rwanda, you're going to Iran. So are your friends kind of like this as well? Like, have you picked up some of that from your friends too?
No, no. My friends let me tell you, tennis players are dweebs. They don't even smoke weed. They don't even smoke weed for the most part. They drink a little bit probably,
Yeah.
but I don't drink at all. I don't smoke weed.
Right.
But they're a bunch of goofballs,
Yeah.
and they're not out looking to go to Rwanda. I'll tell you that. I'm the only one going to Rwanda. But if I don't go there, how am I going to find out about it?
Yeah.
I love primates. I had a monkey. I have stories about monkeys. I had a macaque for a few months, and he and I were very close friends.
That is funny.
And they're a lot of work.
Yeah.
And he used to get loose in the neighborhood, and it was a real bad ball of wax. But I've had a donkey. I've had a dingo
No
as a pet.
way. That is crazy.
Yes, and so there was a lot of freedom in my raising up years. My
Yeah.
parents were a little bit, and they were both Mormons. My parents were both Mormons,
Wow.
and
So
yet my
very
father was
conservative
not.
in a sense. So even through
And
the.
you would think, but all of my uncles and aunts were alcoholics.
Hmm.
So is there a chemical or physical predisposition to becoming an alcoholic? I think so. That's why I never wanted to drink. I didn't want to go down that road.
Hmm.
And think of all the money I saved.
Right.
Um, so life is interesting
Yeah.
at worst.
No, I love it. I
It's
love that you're
interesting.
such a quirky person. Like I can imagine like, people, getting to know you or even when you're traveling around and meeting people, like them just being so like amazed by you and your stories as well.
My wife still can't believe the stories that I tell her that happened to me as a child.
Mm.
And we've been together 40
Yeah.
years, 42 years, and I still have stories I haven't
Yeah.
told her. And it's a cavalcade of adventures
Yeah.
to say that.
Obviously, no one would ever wish on anyone to be sort of poor. But do you feel like, in a sense, kind of having that kind of lifestyle, not having money, that it was like, well, I've got nothing to lose at this point. I don't have to worry or save or kind of think in that sort of direction as opposed to someone who's, making money. They have a certain social status, they have a certain lifestyle status that they've got to meet. They've got expectations from their community that comes with having money. Do you agree with that?
I have a couple of stories about
Yeah.
that. I could only go up. Money doesn't interest me at all. My work interested me. I repaired people's homes. I was a plasterer and tile setter by trade. My father taught me those trades. My father and I built buildings from the ground up. My father could do anything. We did the plumbing, the electrical, the roofing, the air conditioning, everything except the flooring and the cabinets. We bulldozed the land. We dug the holes for the plumbing. We did everything. So I got to work and learn all those trades. And I live in a place right now would be anyone's dream. I live on the water in a private yacht harbor. I have 40-foot slips on my patio. I have all these giant boats parked out on my patio.
Wow.
They sound like tractors, of course, when they
Yeah.
start. So it may as well be a bunch. I may as well live on a farm with a big
Yeah.
lake. But my neighbors drive Rolls Royces and Ferraris and all these things. And I would come home in my beat up old truck every day from work, and it would go over every bump.
Right.
And I would drive through, and I wore a t-shirt and a pair of white Levi's to work every day and a gray hat that matched my shirt, and my hat matched my truck. So I was color coordinated,
Right.
somewhat professional looking. And my neighbors would see me come home and they would say, "Are you lost? Are you looking for a job?" And I go, "No, I live right there."
Yeah.
What a great feeling to have these people who wore their suits and ties to work
Mm.
and have this feeling of success. How does that compare to me, where I came from absolutely rock bottom and ended up exactly where they ended
Yeah.
up? Now, I have a degree in criminology. I went to college for 6 years to get a 2 year AA degree. I went to school at night and I worked all day. I bought my first house by recycling bottles, cans, newspapers, and copper wire. I never rented an apartment in my entire life.
Mm.
I saved up $3,000 and used that as a deposit to buy a condo. My first wife and I never rented. Our dates consisted of driving down the street, picking up beer cans and beer bottles, and putting them in the trunk of our car, and we would recycle them. And in 3 years, we made $3,000 and bought a condo. She had friends who saved newspapers for us and who saved aluminum cans for us. And our whole dating life consisted of picking up trash and recycling it so we could buy a house. Are there many people willing to do that?
Mm.
Maybe. But that's what I did.
Mm.
My dream was to own my own home and take care of my family. That was my dream.
Mm.
I own several properties. I'm worth a couple of bucks. I have no debt. Now you want to talk about something important? Debt.
That's true.
Let's talk about debt.
Mm.
Debt is the killer of success and prosperity.
Yeah.
Don't buy anything if you can't afford it.
Mm.
Simple,
Yeah.
easy, cheap
Very true.
information from an old
Yeah.
man.
I guess times are different. We've got inflation and we've got all these other sort of variables right now. But, no, I
It's
agree. I think
awful.
it's definitely, and I think like this is one of the things in Asia, you can live a very debt-free life because, you have government medical and it's good medicine, like medical care. And then you've got like education, which is very reasonable for a lot of people. And then on top of that, like salaries, you get fairly decent salaries around this side of the world, depending on the industry, I guess, that you're in. So you kind of are able to sort of live a very fulfilling life, I guess, because of just the simple sort of structure of governance in a sense, right? But yeah, I do know a lot of people from the US and the UK that are still paying off student loans. And, you're like, how can you ever enter a life of wealth if you're always having to pay off loans?
The sad thing. I think that's the most important aspect of your life is to keep your spending and your buying in
Yeah.
check. I still think I don't have anything. I still worry about turning the lights off in the kitchen when I'm not in the kitchen. Uh, and maybe because I recycled so much and I hate waste. That's something that I am proud of and embarrassed about at the same
Yeah.
time. But you can't escape your nature when you come from poverty and you become quasi successful. You will always feel that lack of
Yeah.
things and money
Yeah.
forever. And I think that's a good thing. Debt is a powerful force. It can drive you to be
Mm.
successful if you let it, but you can't let it get out of hand.
Yeah. I love it. RC, you got such an interesting story. Like, I'm so glad that, we did this episode. I feel like our listeners as well can take so much away from it. And, just even the entertainment factor. Like, there's just so much like youth in you, which I find so fascinating. Final question, final plugins. Tell us a little bit about your books. I want our listeners to hear about them.
I have a book on Audible at the moment called Sunrise Sunset. It's a book of 10 short stories, and a couple of them are very interesting. I have my book, The Adventures of the Smith Family, is free as an ebook right now. I'm running a large promotion. It just started on the 5th. I have 8 or 9 novels on Amazon. I have a book called Grandpa Ernie's Secrets, which is a spy novel with a female lead that takes place in Italy. I have a book that's based on a true story of my uncle in Costa Rica called Dreams of Costa Rica. He was there during the revolution. I have a book, Sailing Away, which is a follow-up novel to The Adventures of the Smith Family. Both of those books are 18th century English adventure romance tales. It's like Robin Hood meets Downton Abbey.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
And I have a book called Mrs. V, which is a female vigilante story about a woman whose husband has been killed, and she's not really happy with how LAPD is taking care of it, and she's going to take it into her own hands. I have a book called Atlanta, which is a detective novel, and a book called Judgment Day, and that's a detective novel also. All of those first chapters are on my website, and I have a book on my website now in my travel blog called The Bad Seed. It's a finished novel. It's a rough draft, and it's there for everyone to read for free. And I'm now rewriting it as a novel, and I'll put it up on my website as a free book for everyone to come and read.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll put it into the description as well so people can just like click right in. Any
Yes.
nonfiction
And my
books about your
website is,
story, about your life?
well, I started one years ago called Livin' La Vida Loca, and that was my
Yeah.
biography. And I've set it aside. I have a couple of projects going right now, but maybe I should go back into that. And strangely, I haven't written any travel books,
Yeah, that's
which I love
fun.
reading travel. I love reading travel
Yeah.
books and things like that. So I'll get around to that. Hopefully, I'll be here long enough to do that. I have 2 completed novels on my desk that I'm looking to put up on Amazon.
Oh,
My website is cowboyproductions52.com,
yeah.
and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of these stories about my life are on there.
Mm-mm-mm.
I've put them on there for people to read. One of them's called "The Shot in the Dark," and that's about a little bit of a gunfight that I was witness
Yeah,
to
yeah.
as a young child.
So thanks for sharing that, RC, and yeah, thanks for being on Multispective. I really really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.